from there. Okay. All right, guys. Happy Tuesday. And also, if my voice is, if you can't really hear my voice, it's because my voice is raspy, just because of the humidity transition from Dominican Republic to California. And of course, I was telling Pat, of course, it would happen like a few minutes before I talk with him about dogs. So that's how life is
We'll get through it.
sometimes. We'll get through it. But yeah, and then anyone commenting, anyone watching, feel free to leave comments saying you're here or leave a question for us. We would love to answer it. But yeah, I'm here with my friend and really good dog trainer, Pat Stewart, and I'm so happy that we were able to have some time to talk, especially transitioning with like 18 hours
Yeah, it took us a
with
little
me,
while to
and I
find the
was like,
time, right?
oh my God. Yeah, I had to Google it too, and I had to be like, wait, okay, this is the correct time. Okay, cool, cool. And figure that out. Like, because for some reason I couldn't calculate it in my head. Um, but yeah, Pat, I figure, maybe you can just start off with a quick intro to you and just talk about your background and
Yeah, sure.
what you're doing currently with dogs, and we can just go into our topic.
Yeah, too easy. So my name's Pat Stuart. I am a dog trainer. The majority of the work that I do in the dog training space is I work mostly with dogs that bite, I suppose. And on purpose bite. Work with a lot of police and military type dogs as well as sport and competition dogs. I was in the army myself for 12 years. I got out about 8 years ago to pursue dog training full time. Because of an injury in the army, I would have stayed in, to be honest. But so that's what I do. I've learned from a bunch of people sort of all around the world. Probably the most influential person on my career was Bart Bellin. I'm a Nipopo gold grad. I did that, when they first started 5 or 6 years ago or more. Yeah, it's been a great experience doing that. And what I do mostly at the moment is I coach other dog trainers, handlers, that kind of stuff. The majority of the people I work with their dog, as well as people who are hobbyists, enthusiasts, that sort of stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of the gist of me, mate.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you're also famous for the podcast, The Canine Paradigm, with Glenn and
Yeah, I got lucky. I mean, before the oversaturation of the podcast world, me and Glenn, my good friend Glenn Cook, asked me to do a podcast with him. We're 250 something episodes in or something like that of it's called The Canine
Mhm.
Paradigm. And through that, like that's where I've been really lucky. Through that, people listen to that. They know that I know what I'm talking about. And that's where the majority of like, majority of the work that I do in the dog space now is like centered around that podcast. And um, unfortunately for me, it means that I don't get to handle anywhere near as many dogs as I once did. Like I don't do anywhere near as much training as I once did. And now I more teach people how to do those things. I
Right.
still am lucky enough to get my hands on plenty of dogs, but it really, the majority of what I do is train others. And that's all come about through that podcast. It's called The Canine Paradigm.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I love that podcast. Like me, I would just listen to it every time like I go on a road trip, or like even the road trip like on like going to Missouri for NAPO post school. When I went with my friend, we just listened to a couple of those episodes,
Nice.
and just listening to them is either freaking hilarious or it's like so educational, or both.
Yeah, we try to have both.
Yeah, no, it was awesome, and I loved it. And yeah, definitely appreciate the knowledge from just the podcast and just the content in general, even just like the Patreon and things like that. So, and if you haven't subscribed to the Patreon, you should. It's just a
Thank you,
plug in
sir.
for you. Um, but yeah, I figured with this top, like with this topic, because both Pat and I went through like the NAPO post school, and there was always like a thing that we all remember from just going through the course is like we always ask, why does the dog do? And then I figured for most pet owners, just going in depth with that can really
Mhm.
help can really help just understand like why their dogs are doing things. Because like I'm sure you've had like clients like in the past ask you, why is he doing this? Why is he barking at
Of course.
this? Why is he barking at certain individuals? Why is he barking at dogs? You know, or why is he
Hmm.
like, why does he prefer this side over the couch over this side of the couch? Or, you know, just little things like that that I figure really help people like critically think about and just instead of just like analyze the situation versus just like ask the own like ask us like why is he doing this, you know?
Hmm.
Um
Yeah, mate. I think the key to dog training really, like as I teach things now, I break things into three categories. When I teach, and that's like the first is that you got to learn how to motivate your dog. Then you've got to learn how
mhm,
to communicate with your dog, and then using that motivation and communication, now you become the coach, right? And you have to now
mhm,
start actually using those skill sets to manipulate the behaviors, bring on the things that you want. But when we go right back to the start, we talk about like how do we motivate a dog. Now for us in the dog training space where we're going to teach the dog to do particular things, motivation is the key because we need the dog to be a willing participant in the session.
mhm,
But when we're dealing with pet dog and behavioral issues where we're not looking to train the dog to do something, but we're rather trying to come to understand why the dog is doing something or change something that the dog is doing, like stop him doing it, have that trigger for that one thing become a trigger for something else, all that kind of stuff. Is that we really go back to that sort of first principles in dog training is why does a dog do anything? And
mhm,
the truth is it's to better his own situation. Like everything that a dog's doing, they don't really, dogs are never altruistic. I think that there's an argument could be made that altruism doesn't even exist in people, that everything that you do is to better your own situation in one way or another. And
mhm,
so that's kind of the gist of dog training for me is when people come with a behavioral problem, and you can get some very peculiar behavioral problems that it can be very difficult to, take the position of the dog and understand what is it that you're getting from this and why is it that you think that you're able to better your situation by this. But if your dog is performing some sort of behavior, especially if it's a persistent behavior, I can guarantee you that the dog, if it isn't bettering its own situation through doing that behavior, it's convinced that it is. And I think that one of the things that people kind of misunderstand in that space is that you imagine that a dog is trying to always better its situation by getting something good for itself. And like that's sort of the obvious, that's sort of the go-to, that's sort of the thing that you like, it seems like, of course, that's why he's going to be doing anything. So you can unpack that a little bit more and go like, dogs enjoy some peculiar things, right? And different dogs, different bloodlines, different breeds, they can all enjoy like what their idea of a comfortable state can be quite different. So take my Malinois, for example. He seems to be most comfortable at this like mild level of frustration. That's where he's the happiest. And a really example I can give of that is like we have rules in the house, right? Like he's only allowed to display a certain level of drive. He's not allowed to go crazy in the house. He's not allowed to run around. He's not allowed to tear the place apart as he happily would given the opportunity. And one time, one of his toys, like a Kong type thing, was under the couch and it was just out of his reach. And he was laying there, kind of pawing at it and crying and trying to get at this thing, right? Now, like he has the capacity just to light up the chainsaw in his face and rip the couch to shreds to get it, but he didn't because he knows that's against the rule. And he's just kind of frustratedly pawing at this thing. But he has two of the identical toys and one of them was available to him. And so like when you look at that situation, you would say, why is he doing that? Like what on earth is he getting out of this? In that he doesn't actually want the toy because the identical toy is free and available to him, laying right next to him. But the one that he wants, the one that he's trying to get, is under the couch, just out of his reach, and within the confines of the rules that he has in the house that he understands, he's not able to get to that. And trying to get to that was the behavior that he was displaying because he is very comfortable in that mild frustration. Like that's where
mhm,
he sits. That's where he's, and because of that, that trait is what makes him so trainable, right? That trait is what makes him, able to push through the frustration of learning and not have that frustration become aggression quickly and have him, become a problem in that sort of way. And so with that dog, while he's trying to get that, I handed to him the toy that was available and he wouldn't take it. And then I reached under the couch because eventually that frustration does have to become aggression at some point, right? And he gets that aggression would be displayed as eventually ripping the couch apart to get to the thing. So I reach under there and I pass it to him, and there's just sheer disappointment, right? Like just straight up, like upset that I did that, and just kind of held it in his mouth and walked away with it, like almost in disgust. So it doesn't fit our usual behavioral model, right? When we look at a lot of training, we say, why does a dog do anything? To better his own situation. He wants the toy. The toy is, what he wants. That's why he's trying to get it. And it's like, actually, like that's a very surface level understanding of what was happening there. In reality, he actually, the emotional state that he enjoys the most and that he has been bred for, and his ancestors were selected for over time, is to enjoy solving problems, right? Like that's actually what he likes to do. Getting to the end is almost disappointing to him, right? And we see that in a lot of bloodlines and different dogs and different types, where achieving the outcome that they work really hard to achieve is actually somewhat disappointing to them. Most notably, we see that, in say bloodhounds that track. We're getting to the end of the track is almost the worst thing that they can imagine, because they're a difficult dog to reinforce in any other way without tracking. So when they reach the end of the track, it's almost quite punishing to them when they get to the end of the track. And certainly that's how I would describe what happened to my dog, as being like punishing in that moment. Even though I gave him the Kong, I helped him. He had one for free. I helped him get the other one. And then it was, it certainly put an end to the behavior. So that's what I think is that, like, it's worth understanding when we talk about why does a dog do anything, and we say to better his own situation. From our point of view, that could be really difficult to comprehend. And we see some people put up like quite a lot of opposition to that idea. There's sometimes when you say, that's the only reason a dog does anything is to better his own situation. We say, no, my dog, you get those responses where people say, no, my dog does all these things because he knows that I like it, or whatever, insert reason here. But the truth is, when you unpack those, the dog is bettering his own situation in doing those things. The most notable conversation I had about this was with a guy whose dog had been shot, and the dog had come across it had essentially saved his life, but it had been shot in the process. And I was trying to explain to the guy, and he eventually kind of came to understand. I was like, the dog can't understand how a gun works. He can't understand being shot. He couldn't understand that you were in that danger. He was just in that moment bettering his own situation, right? He was fulfilling the training that he had done. And although the outcome was that, and I'm sure the dog is happy with the outcome and how it went, it's still, he was just making decisions moment to moment that made him feel good, or that, like, even not necessarily made him feel good, but was the track that was run at the stimulus that was presented, right? And it just fell in place with the training that the dog knew. So I think that's one of the sort of the key things to keep in mind when we talk about why does a dog do anything, to better his own situation, but that might not be particularly obvious to us, right? Like as we're looking at what the dog is doing, it might not be like, that doesn't seem like the dog is making its own life any better. But what a dog thinks is a good life and what a person thinks is a good life can be starkly different things. That makes sense, man?
Yeah, no, definitely. And then my Wi-Fi will give me like StreamYard will let me know if my Wi-Fi gets choppy. So if I start breaking a little bit, just let me know. But
Sure.
but yeah, no, up the genetics, like, and then what the kind of working dog that you have, like, it's all such important factors. Like before with me, because like my background was very very like watch Cesar Millan, a dog whisperer, and like some of it was just like, one of his big mementos was always just like, it doesn't matter the breed. But then as I grew older, as I learned about working dogs and like all the different roles, now I'm like, yeah, no, it actually does matter, because
Yeah.
it especially is just like, especially learning from Bart, it's like for us is like the dogs, and like we want to teach the dogs be able to like enjoy the work, like the behavior is the reward itself. And then just comparing like the whole idea with like when the light turns on, and then like the dopamine rush is like turns on immediately, right? And as soon as you get the outcome, as soon as you get the reward, there's like immediately like the levels go down. And it's just like it's the work itself for like those dogs is like that's the biggest high, that's the biggest like
Yeah.
time that they
Yeah, that's the idea. Whenever we're training anything, we want that the process towards the reinforcer becomes the reinforcer itself. And like, we can realign that a little bit and just talk about how progression is reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the second part of what I was sort of headed at before is that when we talk about why does a dog do anything to better his own situation, we usually always think about that in the terms of like positive sense, right? In that,
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about like, why is the dog doing it? He wants to improve his situation, usually because he wants to get something. And that's sort of how most of us think about a dog bettering his own situation. But the reality is there's lots of ways in which a dog betters its own situation. And the truth is that the core of like all living organisms know that they should move towards things that they like and away from things that are dangerous or create discomfort or that they dislike. And so when we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at behaviors that come from dogs, and specifically when we talk about pet dogs, for example, right, is that a lot of the times people will have what they would refer to as problem behaviors or bad behaviors in inverted commas that people will see in their dogs. And take, for example, one of them might be fence fighting or chasing people down the street. Like, your dog runs out and bark, lunge, growl at anybody that goes down the street. And
Mm-hmm.
you think, how does the dog, the dog's visibly stressed about it. It doesn't seem like he's having a good time at all. How on earth can we put that into the category of when we ask the dog, why are you doing that? And the answer is to better my own situation. And the reality is that that's like that dog is performing that action because he thinks that he's avoiding some consequence. Now, like in that example with the classic, the dog that chases the mailman away, in every instance, the dog believes that the mailman is a potential intruder, right? Or that the mailman is someone who could come into the home and cause harm. There's a level of distress about that, right? There's a level of concern. And so the dog then wants to, at the presentation of the stimulus, which is the mailman, the dog performs a behavior which in his mind is escaping and avoiding the stress that could come of the mailman coming onto the property. And so the behavior that he's doing is actually driven via negative reinforcement, the pressure being the presentation of the person, the mailman, whatever. And so the behavior that's driven is, if you could ask the dog and say, how is it on earth that you're bettering your own situation by putting yourself into such a high level of stress and performing such a highly stressful and taxing behavior as bark, lunge, growl, pushing the guy down the street? And the answer from the dog will be, well, I'm avoiding harm, right? Like, because
Mm-hmm.
he has this perceived idea that harm is going to happen to him via the mailman coming into the home or, whatever. And so those behaviors that are driven, even though they seem sort of, because we know better, we know the mailman's not intending to hurt the dog. It could seem like an unfit behavior. It could seem like a behavior that doesn't fit the situation. It could seem like a behavior that, actually costs the dog rather than gets it anything. But that's not how the dog's seeing it in that moment. So I think,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I agree with you entirely. Like, the whole point of why does the dog do anything? And we want the behaviors themselves to be reinforcing, and we want that's the opportunity to perform the behaviors to spike the dopamine and then drive the behavior. That's what dopamine does. We can sort of dopamine's a funny one. We can sometimes misunderstand and think that it's always good. Certainly, like, every problematic behavior that you see is that behavior is driven by dopamine, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
a level where it becomes unuseful anymore, or it becomes sort of problematic to dip into too higher levels. There's a sweet spot for sure.
Yep.
But it, like, what I wanted to point out and sort of keep in mind when we're talking, especially if we're talking to a pet dog audience, right, is that when
Yep.
we say, why does a dog do anything? And we say the answer is to better his own situation, really putting yourself into the dog's perspective is the only way to understand that and think like, as the dog, when I'm doing this, what is it that I'm trying to achieve for myself, right? Like, what level of safety, comfort, whatever it is, and how am I doing that? Is it the pursuit of something good? Because that's all the dog will do. They'll pursue something good, or the avoidance or the escape of something bad or uncomfortable or whatever. And that's going to drive
Mm-hmm.
all behaviors, right? Dogs can escape and avoid aversive consequences, and they can pursue positive consequences. And that understanding that is really going to allow you to figure out, why is your dog doing anything. There is, of course, one sort of extra layer to that, and it still goes into the category of like the positive consequence thing, and it sort of relates to what we're talking about with my dog. Is it, it can be very easy to take too much of a behavioral science look at why a dog does anything. We can, I've been guilty, very guilty of this in the past, in just putting things into the category of, well, it's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. All behaviors are driven by those things, and discount the importance of ethology and understanding that sometimes dogs do things just because Mother Nature tells them to do it, right? And but the
Mm-hmm.
truth is, like, even those behaviors that are driven just genetically, right? Like the dog, if you were to ask why you're doing that, they wouldn't have a good reason for you. If you could have that strong conversation with the dog wouldn't have a strong reason other than that they just want to. They just feel like they just need to. It's something that keeps them happy. But one of the reason they would be doing that, even if it's not the pursuit of something that they would get, it's not, we're not going to put it into the positive reinforcement category. Not doing it becomes very uncomfortable, right? And so that becomes we could put that into the category of kind of negative reinforcement of a sort. We're probably kind of butchering that. Like, the scientists out there will be upset at the way we're using these terms, but it makes it helpful for us to think in that way, where we can think, why is a dog doing that? It's just something that he has to do. He doesn't seem to get anything from it. But in doing that, he avoids the discomfort that will come of not doing it. And that sort of relates to what I was saying with my dog. Like, it's not that he wanted the toy. In fact, he didn't want the toy. He just is genetically programmed to be very comfortable at that level of, like, mild level of distress, right? That's where he's very
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. And so chilling out on the couch doesn't do anything for him. He's not into that. That's not reinforcing for the most part, right?
Yep.
What he
Yep.
wants to do is fulfill his genetic prophecy, and not doing that is a form of pressure that he is trying to escape and avoid.
Yeah. No. You hit it 100%. All of that's like just gold right there. I think just like, because I'm always having to like talk to clients, because I mainly work with a lot of pet dogs, and I'm always like, I always say, okay, let's go in depth. Let's look at the dog's perception, and understand where to go, because everyone's, with most clients, people is trying to just like, it's like I'm a plumber. It's like, hey, go fix my broken sink, and then they think it's all done. But I have to be like, no, I don't live with your dog. You live with the dog. So you have to understand why this is happening, so
Yeah.
then you can prevent it, right? And even with the whole mailman thing, right? I think the whole mailman thing, just like, sometimes the guy's carrying like a big ass package and takes like 20 minutes to be in front of the porch. Sometimes it takes like 30 seconds. And for that dog, it's just like barking's already a reinforcement behavior as it is. And then just
Mm-hmm.
like, now it works on the duration of like, okay, he's not barking at 3 seconds. He's not going away after 3 seconds of barking. Okay, a minute. Now he goes, and it's already like reinforcing as itself, and then
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just keeps going. And then I tell people that, and they go, "Oh, that's why he's doing it." I'm like, "Yes."
Yeah.
And even just like, like dog reactivity, or just like people, even just like when people have like really insecure dogs, or like fearful behavior dogs,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like, you know, it's so important just to dissect the whole thing, and like the whole motivation, the whole reason behind it, as to like, why is he doing this
Mm.
or like, how is this bettering his situation? And it's like, most reactive dogs are either like, especially the insecure dogs, are either trying to keep people and other dogs away from their space, and
Mm-hmm.
then they feel like, okay, I can't really trust my owners to do this, so I'm going to display all these behaviors,
Yeah.
and to keep them away. And even just I think just them figuring it out, like from like a little growl, and the person backed off,
Mm-hmm.
and they had that aha moment, like, aha, that's
Yeah.
how I. And then when they explode more, then they're like, whether the owners take them away, or the owner and the other person, the dog, just end up walking across the street after like the big outburst, then the dog itself already just finds out, like, oh, okay, this is how I get the job done. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's always just like, me learning a little bit, like, Grisha Stewart with like bat, and then just finding all these other ways where I can tell people, like, okay, like, let the dog doesn't feel like there's another option to better the situation, and it's just like, like, let's get let's get him to do this instead, and then reward. And like, the reward will be it's in itself, but you can always like supplement with like a little bit of food or something. But it's just like,
Yeah.
just being able to show a dog the alternative route, like, okay, like I know you do this to better your situation, but like here's this option.
Yeah.
And usually it's just like, aside maybe like maybe a little bit of a correction here and there, but like, just showing like you could do this instead too.
Yeah, and I think in that sort of situation, talking about where you would employ a technique like that, I think that um, there's a lot of comfort in a controlled situation, right? And so one of the things that I think we see quite a lot with the average kind of pet dog owner is they don't necessarily, um, you know, provide a lot of safety and control, right? And so one of the things that can really help with dog reactivity and that kind of stuff, when you look at like why is a dog doing this, very often the dog is just trying to take control of what it perceives as a somewhat uncontrolled situation. And so, when you get a dog that is bark lunge growling at another dog or whatever it's doing, uh, it's seeking that level of comfort and safety that comes of knowing that this is not going to go bad for me. And so, I think sometimes we approach those things very behaviorally from the standpoint of the dog, where we're like, okay, well, now, as you said, maybe we're going to walk away, we're going to, apply a correction if need be. There's all these different things that we can talk about doing. When in reality, just having an owner that takes control of the situation and has control over their own dog indicates to the dog that, okay, well, there is control in this situation. I don't need to take over, right? I don't need to step up to that place, because that is a very stressful thing to do for most dogs. Most dogs
Hmm.
aren't interested in having to take control of any form of situation, and just doing that is is another layer in the stress that is going to add to the overall discomfort it feels around whatever the trigger is or whatever. And so, that's what I think, that when we talk about why does a dog do anything, sometimes there's an underlying layer that can be driving behavior that is more a case of like, much less a case of let's look at the behaviors that the dog is doing, but let's look at the situation and that brought on those behaviors, and how do we give the dog some control in those situations. And you might, there's options with this kind of stuff, right? Like where you might decide to give the dog control via a control type behavior, where the dog has a signal it can give to you and say, hey, I'm not comfortable here, I want to leave. Most people will teach that via like, some kind of check-in, whatever the dog looks at them, and that's your cue to say, all right, well, let's get out of here. You've
Hmm.
given the dog control via a behavior that you're okay with. The other one is to take away control completely, right? So that's one of the things where if you demonstrate a strong amount of control, then the dog goes, well, I don't need to, right? You have it under control. And that's where we talk about those sort of exercises where we would advocate for the dog and that kind of thing, right? So I think there's many roads that lead to Rome, right? There's lots of ways to
Yep.
do certain things. And I think that what we find is that the majority of the people who never come into any of these issues with their dogs, like, which is the majority of people, right? Like, I think as dog trainers, we have quite a warped perception of how the average person lives with, manages, and interacts with their dogs, because we engage with the people who have problems. They're the people that get in contact with us. And so they're the people whose homes we go into. They're the dogs we interact with by far and away the most, are people who already have significant issues with their dogs. But the truth is, the majority of people are getting along pretty well with their dogs. And the reality is the dogs are fairly fulfilled, so that there's not a bunch of displaced energy, right? There's not a bunch of like, I have to do something for the sake of doing something, because they have roles that they're getting every morning, or whenever the people train their dog, they walk their dog, they give their dog a purpose, they let their dog do what it was, what Mother Nature tells the dog what it needs to do. That alone removes a huge layer of stress from everything that you'll later do with the dog. And then they have the training in check, right? The dog, by doing training with the dog, we learn, first of all, how to motivate it, as we said, right? Like, you can't train a dog unless you've figured out how to motivate the dog. You're using positive motivation. You're going to be using sort of aversive motivation as well. So you tell the dog, hey, I like when you do that. Hey, I need you to do this, even though you might not want to, or hey, don't do that again, right? And when you have those ingredients that you can use to communicate with your dog, then when you come into these situations where the dog would feel uncomfortable, you have the things to stop it. So that's one of the things that, like, what we don't really see from people who train their dogs are much of those reactivity issues, because those things tend to just kind of fade away or not present themselves in the same way that they would if the person hadn't figured out what motivates the dog, hadn't figured out how to communicate the dog, and then use those tools whilst they were, in the real world with the dog. And so that's what I mean. I think that sometimes just looking at the surface, which is what everybody wants to do when there's a problem with the dog. Everybody just wants to be like, "Hey, I need this fixed." In the same way you said, mate, like when the plumber comes around, my tap's leaking. I need that fixed. And yeah, he can replace the washer in there, and that'll fix it. But if there's something I'm doing when he's not around, if the truth is like I'm cranking that tap shut beyond, like if I'm using the set of vice grips to shut it every time that I do, I'm going to be wearing out that washer. I'm going to be damaging that. And that's why it's going to be leaking again within a week of him leaving. And that's the same for us with dog training, is that addressing the issue itself, the issue is seldom the issue. And that, like, it's usually almost always that we need to get to the bottom of what's going on in the whole relationship here. What's going on with the whole lifestyle of the dog here? And how is it that we can have the dog understand that you can and will better your own situation via a set of behaviors that is much more in line or socially acceptable, or, like with what we want, rather than this problem thing that you're demonstrating.
Hmm. Yeah, and I always like I always kind of compare like like those family trees with like the root charts kind of thing. I always
Mhm.
like tell people, if there's always like there's more to it than just the behavior that the dogs are always displaying, right? And then, it's like I always have to find like you have to find like that Tootsie Roll center, or like that main root of it, where if we can address that main one, then
Mhm.
all the other behaviors are, it's like you mowing the grass, but then you never uproot the root. You just trim the grass and it just keeps growing again. And it's just
Mhm.
like, you can deal with the surface, but if you don't deal with the underlying thing with like the roots and things, like once you deal with the roots, then it's like everything else will dissipate, or everything
Yeah,
else
for sure.
will solve within itself, rather than just like dealing with the behavior as it is, when you can just go more in depth.
Yeah,
and
100%.
and then the genetic prophecy part that you talked about, I really like that. I'm going to take that. I'm definitely going to borrow that, just because it's like, I've had like a couple of clients that have gone like working border collies, or even like because Malamutes are being popular, like via
Mhm.
John Wick, or that
Mm.
movie with Chat, not Chat, Channing Tatum,
Mhm.
and they're just like good looking dogs, or they look cool, and people get them, and I'm just like, do you know what they were bred for? And they're like, no, I just got it because they look good. Or they say, oh, I got it from my uncle in Mexico, and then you know I th- and then they're just giving it out, and I'm have to be like, that genetic pressure of like herding, the genetic
Yeah.
pressure of like the prey drive is just like, I have to like let people know, like, your dog was bred to have this working role, and
Mm.
it has, like, like how we talked about having the dogs be fulfilled. If our dogs aren't fulfilled, like either practicing what they were bred to do, or like,
Yeah.
getting like that mental physical stimulation, and you know and every dog's a unique individual of their own, but if you don't have an idea what your dog needs, then it's like you can't really understand what, like.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I think your breed is a good jumping off point to understand that, like, uh, the ethology component, like what is it that's going to spin this dog's styles? But then, as exactly as you say, mate, every dog's an individual. Sort of as an example, especially with Malinois, right? Like, my own dog, my own Mallee Remy is injured. He's injured all the time.
Hmm.
And so uh he had like a tear in his groin, one of the muscles there. And so uh, he would go to club, we would be training, and he could hear other dogs working. He wants to work. So what I would do is I would, put him on the table, like the bite table, and let him bite. And for a long time, right? Because I'm training a bunch of decoys, I'm teaching them how to work him. And so like I could physically exhaust the dog. And most people would look at for a Malinois and go like, okay, you tick the box. Like that's going to satisfy that dog. He's going to be a happy dog now, right? Like, but the truth is it doesn't really satiate him at all, because it's not like being put on a bark box and getting to bite someone is like, yes, that physically exhausts him. And like, sure, certainly he does it and enjoys it, But 20 minutes later, when he's recovered, it's like it never happened, right? It doesn't satisfy him in any way because my dog enjoys learning, right? He enjoys solving puzzles. Like I said, it's that mild frustration, that level of like trying to figure things out. That's where he's most comfortable, and that's what I have to do in order to be able to satiate him, right? And so,
Mhm.
when I very quickly sort of identify that, like, hey, he's not happy doing this. I would rather bringing him in and we do a bunch of obedience, but very sort of static, so that he's not going to injure himself. I'm not going to send him on any long bites or anything like that. But we have to allow him to do work. He has to earn those things, because to him, getting it for free or just expressing himself just physically and just biting the whole time, like, it doesn't really like, it exhausts him physically, but it doesn't spin the dials. And that's what is this sort of the very obvious version for us as dog trainers. I know that. I know the dog, I know the bloodline, I know everything. But when we look at someone's pet dog and they say, oh, well, I walk him or I run him, I throw the chuck it, or, whatever it is, I do that an hour a day, he gets plenty of exercise. And it's like, well, for some dogs, that's just not enough, right? Like, some dogs are fine with it. They just get to sprint around. They're happy, right? Like, there's certain, especially sight hounds, they're happy just to blast off and that's them. They're satiated, right? Like, they don't need anything beyond that. But other breeds, other bloodlines, they're not. They need something else. There's something more that they need. One of the things that we see a lot, say with like blockhead dogs, is that they want to fight other dogs all the time. Now, it's really easy just to say, well, they're bred for that. Like, people's are fighting dogs and that's what they're bred to do. And it's like, the truth is, you can provide them that in other ways. Now, you could exercise that dog as much as you want. You could let him run around in circles. You could go for the longest walk that you can. But unless you're providing that relationship and also provide, like, spinning the dial of conflict, that dog enjoys conflict. He likes fighting, and he will happily fight with you, but in a controlled environment where you can put the rules to it and you can do it via a toy. That will massively reduce the dog's want or need to do that with another dog. So it's very rare that it's like, okay, like, the dog must do this one thing. We can provide all kinds of surrogates for it. But the truth is, as you unpack the layers of what it is that motivates this dog, because we're talking, why does the dog do anything? To better his own situation. It's motivation that drives him to do those things. We can unpack that and get to the bottom of, like, okay, but what is the actual driver of these behaviors, right? Like, not what's on the surface. What does it look like? What is the behavior that he's actually doing in the moment? Okay, yeah, he's trying to fight another dog. He wants to run down, bark, lunge, growl. He wants to engage with another dog. Okay, but does he really want to do that? Or does he want to engage in, like, higher levels of conflict? Does he want to push, does he want to push the limits of what he can endure in that conflict game, but in a safe way where when he stops, he stops? Or does he want to solve puzzles? All
Mhm.
these sorts of things. There's so many different variations of what it is that actually drives the behavior. Very rarely is the actual behavior the thing that we need to do in order to fulfill the dog. And like I say, the best example I have is my own dog. You would look at him and go, oh, he has to do bite work, right? Like, he's a biting dog. He enjoys it. And it's like, actually, no, he has to earn bite work. That's actually what he wants to do, right? The process along the way is what actually makes him happy. That working with me, that solving the puzzles and having to use his brain and think and contain himself, that's actually what he wants to do. He wants to be a little bit trapped in behaviors that lead to earning things. He wants to have to cap himself and figure things out along the way. That's what it actually is.
Mhm.
And if I just go for providing the end result, it's never going to work out for him. It's never going to make him totally happy.
Yeah. No, definitely, man. And I think also too, just like from what you said before, I think also the other important factor is just like the clarity, right? Just like like how we teach, how like what we teach the dog, how we do it. It's like important, like with the clarity, like just like like how we say when we come to advocating the dog, like, hey, don't worry about this, don't worry about this dog across the street, I got it. And so just being able to give that kind of
Mhm.
information that the dog understands is also important too. And
Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
like,
yeah.
unpack that a bit is just, you go, well, when the dog is, if it's not that he wants to engage with other dogs, like, it's a fear related thing, all he wants is safety. He wants to know that everything's going to be okay. And if
Mhm.
you're not able to provide the dog the inputs that like allow him to feel that way, then he has to take control of that situation. And so that's how he's bettering his own situation. But he really, all he wants is to feel safe. So if you can
Hmm.
say, hey, I've got this, don't worry, I can control that other dog. I'll demonstrate that to you. I need you to do this so that I can do that. The dog's like, yeah, sweet, got it. Like, because the actual thing driving that problematic behavior that you bark, lunge, growl, whatever it was, the need that I'm fulfilling via doing that is safety. So hey, like no worries, man. I'll provide you safety, but I can take care of that situation, and the problem behaviors tend to go away. The other thing, especially since we're talking pet dogs and the bark, lunge, growl at other dogs, is you know, unfortunately, a lot of the signals that people give are misinterpreted by dogs, right? Or interpreted differently than what we might expect that a person would understand. So when your dog is bark, lunge, growling, if it's pulling into the leash or you're popping on the leash or all those kinds of things, if that's not enough to stop, then the way that a dog perceives that is it could be an activating cue. So if your dog is bark, lunge, growling at another dog and you're popping it on the collar where it's flat collar prong, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're jerking on the collar, and you probably are because the dog's pulling on the collar, and then you stop doing that and the dog continues to do it, well, that is a pressure that was overcome via doing the behavior. And so
Hmm.
that pressure is going to activate that behavior again in the future. So that's one of the things when you see people saying, like, hey, I don't understand why my dog's doing this. I'm cranking him on the collar. I'm trying to get him to stop it. That's an aversive. And you said that the dog will want to avoid the aversive. Well, perhaps your communication with the dog has led to him thinking that he avoids that aversive by displaying the exact opposite behavior than you want, right? And
Hmm.
so he thinks that if he is bark, lunge, growling and you pop him on the collar and he continues to bark, lunge, growl, he stopped the collar pops via bark, lunge, growling. So in
Mm.
future, when he sees that trigger, he goes, oh, I feel like I should probably bark, lunge, growl. You get a bit like, uh-oh, that's coming, and go tight on the leash. That tightness on the leash becomes a signal to the dog, like, yes, that's exactly what I want. Go ahead, bark, lunge, growl, right? And so that is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to achieve in that moment with the dog. But from the dog's point of view, we gave that signal. So understanding, not just like when we talk about why does a dog do anything, is not just understanding what is the base layer of this, right? Like, what is this behavior actually driven by? Like, what is it that's making the dog truly do this? How do I provide that somewhere else? But then if that doesn't work, it could be, or as well as that, we also have to investigate, like, what signals am I giving the dog and how are those signals perceived by the dog? Because even though I might be saying with my voice, don't do something, I might be telling the dog with my actions to do it. And of course, the things that my dog can feel, the things that my dog can see in me is going to have a much higher priority to him than the things that he can hear me say, right? That's probably the least important thing to him compared to the tactile inputs he's getting via the collar, as well as the visual inputs, the triggers that he sees, my body reactions, all those kinds of things. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of layers to think about when we say, why is a dog doing anything? It's like, well, I promise you, he's just bettering his own situation. But the way that he's doing that might not be very obvious at all.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean just like the layers talking about Remy, how it's just like he doesn't want the ball, he doesn't want the bike, he wants the road, he wants to figure
Mm,
out how, and
mhm,
it's it's so good to dissect that, and then just like even the dogs, like like because I've learned from Jay Jack as well, just like
mhm,
just learning how to work with like the dogs that have like a lot of game, and like
mm,
like the pitties and the fighting dogs that just have a lot more intensity, how they like conflict, or just
mhm,
working with certain dogs that do enjoy the conflict than just like a cookie or something like that, right? And then
yeah.
just to be able to like of course fulfill them, but fulfill them in not like here's a dog to go at. It's like, okay, here's a tug, or a little bit like practicing like stalking, chase, like
Mhm,
run around, celebrate, right? It's just so important to really like. I get many pet dog people that's just thinking like go for an hour walk, or 2 5-minute, 30-minute walks a day is enough to make your dog happy. And I go, no, your dog in particular needs like 45 minutes or an hour of this. He likes
Mhm.
to problem solve. I think you providing him like some like an itinerary. I tell people like if your dog's at home with you all day and it's like and it's somewhat active to pretty active, you want to be able to have like a schedule or like have like different options that your dog can go through and is happy mentally and physically. Or even like if you found like if you have a terrier, you know, you go to like find like a place that does urban locating or earth dog, or if you have like or if you have like maybe a corgi or something where there's like a sheep herding class or like something where you
Mhm.
can redirect that focus into like something productive versus like waiting for the dog to like dig a hole in your house in
Yeah.
your backyard or
Yeah.
rip the pillows or even like there was this one example where like I had this doodle client and the mom works at home. She does like a lot of Zoom sessions and things like that. And the dog was at home, like bored all day. And the dog figured out if I can grab this pillow or remote control from the living room and I walk it by my mom's office, she immediately gets off of the computer and plays with me. Or
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what the dog perceives. And the owner's like, how do I get him to stop getting the pillows while I'm at work?
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, your dog's bored as hell.
Mhm.
And she saw grabbing this pillow was a play with mom button, and mom immediately reacted and played and like play keep away. And so
Yeah.
I had to like explain it that way because I'm like going more into like what the dog is viewing that works because you know it's like that kid that breaks the vet like knocks the lamp over or breaks something to get attention is not positive attention, but the kid got the attention he wanted, even though it
Mhm.
was we can perceive as negative, you know? So
Mhm.
it's definitely it's definitely just like a lot of people like I know some people say dogs are simple, like, but if you really look at it, it's just kind of like, nah, this like these dogs are just like a Rubik's cube and with hair. It's just like you have to like figure out all the color matches and things like that.
Yeah, I
So
think you hit the nail on the head, mate. Like those destructive behaviors in the home can come from a lot of different places. It can just be that the dog is bored and like straight enjoys it, right? Like because it can be fun to tear things apart. As well as exactly as you say, they could be bringing on, that they could be trying to get themselves into, trouble in inverted commas, right? Like, because especially most people, if the dog grabs something, runs away with it, they chase them, the trouble that the dog will get into is not really like the way that most dogs would perceive that. You imagine your dog grabs socks that are been taken off and starts running around the house with them. That's one of the big complaints we always get, right? And people chase the dog and they eventually get it off the dog and they kind of like they will have to sort of forcibly remove it from the dog's mouth. And so I sort of explain to people like when I'm teaching a dog to be possessive, that's kind of exactly what I do. Right? Like I want the dog to get the thing. I'm going to chase him. I'm going to imply that it's hard for me to get it. I'm going to make him feel victorious in having run around with it. And then when I do catch the dog, I'm not going to just take it straight off of him. I'm going to make it kind of difficult to get it back from him, exactly like you're doing with that sock. And then the scolding that people want to provide to the dog after that, it's seldom something that the dog really truly sees as being aversive, right? Like more often the dog sort of a lot of the times when we see that, the dog considers, well, I'm paying the penalty for having lost, right? Like that's what happens. This is the cycle we go through. Eventually, when you get the thing back from me, I get like I get the tap on the nose and told I'm a naughty boy, but then we just go back to the same cycle. And because people love their dogs, they enjoy the company. Most people don't admit it, but they secretly love that game. It only becomes an issue when the dog has eaten the sock and has to have a surgery to remove it. You know what
mhm.
I mean? So like there's all these things that reality is the majority of the problem behaviors we see in the home or the bad behaviors, right? They're just a dog having a good time. But then that can have extra layers to it as well. Like one of the things that we see is, separation anxiety can be can result in destructive behaviors, and that can have a variety of different levels, right? It could be that the dog, like it genuinely could be that the dog is concerned in your absence, and that's one of the things that we see, say, with like shoes, when the dog will destroy someone's shoes. Now, like there's even sort of evidence to, in how does the dog destroy the shoe? Like, is it that the dog has torn the shoe apart? Then it probably just was something fun to tear apart. But you see, sometimes dogs, especially, will grab a shoe and just kind of suckle on it, and they'll damage and ruin the shoe, but they'll just be suckling on it. People say, "Why does he do that?" We'll say, "Well, that probably stinks of you, that shoe, right? Like of the essence of what the dog considers you. The smell, that shoe is very heavy in it." And that will be like a suckling, self-soothing behavior in your absence, right? That could be one reason why the dog is doing that. So, now you're treating those two things really differently. One's a game that the dog is trying to play, right? Just tearing the shoe apart because it's fun. And the other, kind of suckling into that shoe, is that the dog is trying to self-soothe because it's having a hard time in your absence. And so those are really different things that we're going to fix. Right now, like it looks the same, but what we're going to do about it is quite different. What's happening in the mind of the dog is quite different. So you're spot on, mate. Like it's a little bit of a puzzle to solve. Is why is the dog doing that? He's bettering his own situation, but how? Right? Like what is it that he's doing? What and there's layers to all this kind of stuff. Like, and dogs are fluid as well. Like as a dog, a young dog is different to an old dog within the same dog, that they have different hobbies and interests. Like one of the things that I think is real funny about my dog, right? Like my dog, my Malinois, he's a pretty strong nerve dog, which means that he's very possessive, but he doesn't have a lot of guarding of the house, right? So like it takes a lot to get him angry in the house. But in spite of that, one of his favorite things in the whole world to do is take out the garbage with me. And so when he sees me getting the liner out of the garbage and I'm going to take it to the main bin, down on the street, he gets super excited, and he gets really excited at the prospect of running out ahead of me and making sure that there's no one down there. And if there is, he'll bark at him, he'll push him out of the way. And, then he like kind of holds the space while I walk down and put the bin in, and then he turns around and runs back into the house. And he always kind of lingers behind me. Now, to my dog, that's really important. I don't know why. I don't know whether that's like him, like it's some sort of like he feels that it's his job is to clear the space. That's something that usually happens at night. He wants to go down there, like he wants to sort of provide that protection type thing, because he's a Malinois. He does a lot of bite work. He considers himself like a protector, I suppose. But if I don't do that, if he sees me taking out that garbage and for whatever reason I say to him, "Hey, you're not coming down, you have to stay in the house," I'm coming back to a problem. Like without a doubt, I'm coming back to some sort of problem in the house, because that energy, that has to go somewhere, right? Like, and so that's what I think happens quite a lot with people's dogs, is that they are triggering their dog to feel a certain way emotionally, but then not allowing the most suitable behavior to come of that emotion, right? And so, another one, say for example, with my own dogs, is, I train a lot of other people's dogs, and I often come home smelling like other dogs. And so there's a sweet spot I have to be careful of, where like if I'm, say, training a dog at my home where my dog can be aware of it, that's really going to piss him off. And that's going to result in, and it's easy to say that it's jealousy. Like there's all these categories you can put that into, right? And say, but it doesn't, I don't know which one truly fits. I don't know which is the correct reason why it's happening, but it means that that's a management thing that I have to do, because I know that this, like my dog being aware that I'm training another dog in that moment is going to drive a certain mindset, and that is going to lead to certain behaviors happening. And so I have to manage that, right? It's no big deal. Like, it's not like it's a problem in my life, but these are all the little things that we say, like, why does a dog do anything? And the dog's doing what seems like unproductive behaviors or out of character behaviors. There is something that drives it. And you can, as we talked about right at the start, there's plenty that you can do in order to fulfill your dog. But then there's other things that you can say, well, I know this will make the dog feel a particular way. Now I'm into management, right? Like where I can go, well, I'll train you beforehand. I'll put you away, or, I do like whatever the things that I do with my dog while I'm training other dogs, because I know that that will bring up his arousal. And having him in a high state of arousal in my house is not conducive to happily living, right? So I know
Yep.
this is something I have to manage. This is something that I have to be aware of and thoughtful around the way that I do these things. And I think just thinking from your dog's perspective, like an understanding, what is it that is going to bring this dog up in arousal? How's he going to manage that arousal? And what outlets am I going to give him? What ways am I going to do that? And can I create a habit for this dog over when he feels a particular way, he does a particular thing? And just by, following that pattern, you can definitely mitigate a lot of what we think of as bad behaviors or destructive behaviors or things that we just don't want to see more of. We understand like, hey, I can't stop this mindset from happening. Like you are going to feel that way because this is the way life is. This is who you are. But I can start to manipulate the behaviors that follow when you feel that way.
Yeah, and then just the word pattern, like pattern, it's definitely a big thing because from from Sunday to Saturday, we're such pattern based creatures that it's just like, like just picking up your keys, or from wearing your work shoes to your walking the dog shoes, or like from the pants you wear, from like the time, like dogs. I tell people this all the time. It's just like we don't pay attention to the dogs nearly as much versus like what the dog does, and the
Oh,
dog will just knows like what time you're gonna get your coffee, and the dog just knows like all these itty bitty details that is just like we're basically like we're like their documentary show, or like we're like they're just watching us like, oh, he's gonna go get his coffee at like 7:30, and then he's gonna go take a shit like at 8 o'clock, and then
yeah.
just so like just we're so pattern based that the dog is already assuming, or like the dog is like anticipating that this might happen, and it's just crazy. I'm just gonna read some of the comments real quick.
Okay, what do we got?
We got John. He said, "Hey guys." We
Hey,
got
John.
Derek. This is gonna be rad. And I actually did go to school with Derek. He was definitely a fun guy to be around. And then Bart, he says, "Why?" Oh my God, Bart nicknamed me Chicken George for some reason, and I don't know why. Like one day I'm eating like a lasagna, and he says to me, "You eat like a chicken," and just walks out the door, and I'm like, "Okay." And it was just like I was just speechless. I was just like, why is he doing this to me? And I'm just like, okay, my nickname is Chicken George. So
Yeah.
Chad, we got why does the dog come neutral to the stimulus? Let's see. That's an interesting question. What
Why
do you
does a
think
dog
of that?
become neutral to a stimulant? Well, neutrality is actually very difficult thing to achieve, and certainly even more difficult to maintain.
Hmm.
So dogs are very rarely neutral to anything. You just get kind of neutral to start, and then things are either valuable or dangerous, right? They're positive, they have a value, we like it, or they're dangerous and we want to avoid it. And any kind of stimulus that leads to any consequence is going to have to fall into one of those categories. I think that in dog training, we refer to neutral quite a lot. When in reality, it's probably never that the dog is very neutral to many of the things that we say that the dog is neutral to. Take, for example, we do a lot of, my game in PSA, we often refer to decoy neutrality, right? Like where we want the dog neutral around the decoy because we have to do a lot of what we call like secondary obedience. We have to do a lot of things that aren't bite work in the presence of the decoy. And we often use this term decoy neutrality. I use it. It's just the phrase in common usage, but there's nothing neutral about it, right? Like there is absolutely nothing neutral. There's a strong draw. There has to be, right? Without that, I can't be successful in the game. But what I need is that signal is conditional. And so that under a certain set of conditions, that presence of that signal means one thing, and under another set of conditions, the presence of that signal means another thing. Because if the dog were neutral to the decoy, it would be the same as being neutral. It would be like a post, right? It provides nothing. And I've never seen that. Even the dogs that, like my own, that won't bite without permission and like is totally capable. Anything that he can do in the presence of a decoy. It's not neutral, right? Like we call like, and I would say, yeah, he's got great decoy neutrality, but there's no neutrality about it. It has strong association, but given the set of conditions, it has different associations. And so neutrality really doesn't, in my opinion, sort of only exists in the start, and then it's got to go into the category. That needle has to either go, nope, this is dangerous, or yes, this is valuable to me. And it very only for a very short period of time does anything neutral. And anything that provides an input isn't going to remain neutral. So like you can have neutrality to like elements of the environment, but if they move, if they interact with the dog very quickly, they're or if they pose some risk or some value to the dog very quickly, they're no longer neutral.
That was a great answer. Good question though. And there's like another one down here. Probably be a good question for you to answer. Heather, oh yeah, Simcoe is a great example of a dog who needs to be challenged mentally. That dog, I put on a bite suit for like Thanksgiving, and he nailed me and just left me a bruise, even with the bite suit. That dog is just that dog's wild, but I love Simcoe. He's the best.
Yeah,
Let's
right.
see.
Okay.
I got Clayton Matthew. Glad I caught this. He said activation is a hell of a drug. Indeed, it is. Got got this guy. Tiber instinctually being versus logical being, nature versus man. Nature will always find a way to make sense of it. Thank you guys for a brilliant chat. And then here's this one. And here's the question. How can quickly restart a game and pray when the dog is heavily possessive on the toy?
It kind of depends what you sort of mean by that, right? So like in order to bring the dog back to the start of the prey sequence, he can't be in possession of the thing, right? So like you can work your way back. So like that prey sequence, it's a linear flow, but you are able to take a couple of steps back sometimes, right? So if the dog's in possession and he's at the point where it's like, he's parading or he's getting ready to dissect and consume, you can bring the toy back to life, right? And you can bring it back into the fight, right? Like, so that's what we say that's why you see a lot of people. It's why I use the ball on a really long string. It's why you see sometimes in the bite work, you see people will attach a leash to the sleeve, stuff like that. So that when the dog is in possession and the dog like is now closing in over it and it's mine, I've paraded it and I'm about to eat it, which is not necessarily like, literally going to eat it, but is going to start to tear it apart, which is what they'll tend to do with a prey item that's a toy, not a live being or a previously live being. You can take a couple of steps back in that prey sequence by bringing it back to life, because if the prey suddenly comes back to life after it's dead, then you've got to go back into the fight, right? Like you have to continue to kill it. So you can work back to there. You can't, while it has possession of the thing, you can't go into necessarily the stalk. You can't necessarily go into chase, but you can bring it back to life, and you can create a couple of steps back where you can't go to strike, but you can go to the fight, the kill. And then in that's where you would then try to like get the toy from the dog. So while the dog is then, chewing whatever, that's where you would be able to pop it out of its mouth, at a regrip, whatever, something like that. If you can't do that and you don't have an out, then you're kind of left with no choice, and you can't distract the dog off it. It's one of the things that we might do with the pet dog. Certainly with a working dog, I don't want to be able to distract the dog off of it. But, once, if you can't get it from the dog, then you have to find an opportunity, or create an opportunity, and that would look like pressure via like lifting the dog off it or something like that.
All right, cool. And then Heather got a good question. Can you guys talk about how much you feel you guys can ask an owner to change their lifestyle or expectation to fulfill the needs of the dog they have?
Yeah, so like that's a tricky one, and this is one of the reasons why I I don't do anywhere near as much pet dog training as I used to, and it was just because I have the opportunity not to. Right, I love training the dogs, but one of the issues that we face as dog trainers, for the most part, is that most dog training is done by um, like obligation, in that people have had an issue with their dog and they only want the issue fixed, right? Because that's why they're calling you. They're like, oh, I just want my dog to be my pet dog that doesn't do anything outside the scope of what I want to do. And that's why I love my job, and it's why I'm so happy in what I do, because people that come to me usually come to me with like, hey, I'm trying to achieve this with my dog. I don't like, I say that I consider myself more of a coach than a dog trainer. And it's not that I only work with people who are doing sports, especially not just bite sports. It's kind of a misunderstanding of what I do. But what I prefer to only work with is people who are achieving things with their dogs. And this doesn't have to be titles, but when people say, hey, this is what I want, because like, we have to always be able to apply that sort of dead man's test to any kind of training, that if a dead man can do it, then I can't train a dog to do it. And so when people say to me, there's an issue with the dog and I don't want him to bark at the door, right? I don't want that. And it's like, okay, but I can't teach him not to bark at the door. I can teach him to do a specific thing, but I can't teach him not to bark at the door, because that is, a dead man doesn't bark at the door, right? But so, to sort of go back to the question, how much can you ask people to change their lifestyle? Is, well, like, you have, like, a lot. You have to. And something that I used to do quite a bit is, if I got a strong sense that people were not interested in changing their lifestyle, and especially if they had a very high drive dog, one thing that we kind of stigmatize a little bit in the dog training world, and certainly not in the working dog world, which is where I sort of carried this over to the pet training, is convincing people to rehome their dogs, right? Like, if you don't want this dog, like, don't stick with it. And this is one of the things that, say, in the working dog space, we're very like, I want what I want from my dog. I want a particular type of dog. And if the dog isn't that, then me resenting that dog for the next 15 years is not good for me, and it's not good for that dog. And chances are, especially in the working space, if the dog is not suitable for me, it's because it doesn't have the drive. So it's going to be suitable for someone else, right? And in the pet space, usually when a dog, someone gets a like cool working line dog that they really shouldn't have gotten, if I can't convince those people to change their lifestyle, and I'll put in the work to do that, I'll convince them that it's in the interest of their dogs. But some people just can't, man. Like, some people just don't have the time. They've got kids, they've got jobs. Maybe their lifestyle has changed significantly from when they got the dog to what they have now. If people are unable to provide the right lifestyle for the dog, I have no qualms with, like, offering up the idea of rehoming the dog. Now, that doesn't look like dumping the dog at a rescue, right? Like, that's not what we're talking about. It's a private rehome where you enter the community of the people who have that kind of dog, who want that kind of dog, and say, hey, I have this dog. There's nothing wrong with him. It's just that he is too high a drive for me. I'm unable to fulfill the dog, and offer up and see, because it's very likely there's someone looking for that exact type of dog. I think one of the things, the only opposition I really get to that is, a lot of people don't want their dog going to a working home because they don't think it'd be treated well. And in reality, like, that becomes a conversation more about what fulfillment and what a happy dog actually is. Because, take, for example, like, I had a Springer client one time. They had a Springer Spaniel, got in touch with me because they knew I had one, and seen the training, and were really, had a great dog, like, an actually incredible dog. And it just was a lot, and they weren't interested in doing the things. And I gave them all the things that they could potentially do, all the training that the dog would require, all the games they could play with the dog. And it was a time issue for them. They just didn't have the time. And so for me, I was like, well, I can rehome this dog for you. I'll buy him off you, and I will put some training on him, and I will sell him to an agency. Like, we can all be the winners here. And the opposition they had to that was that, when I spoke about they want to know what his life will look like. I'm like, he'll live in a kennel. He'll be a kennel dog, and he'll come out to do his work, and he'll have a handler, but that handler it's not his special dog. It's his work tool. And that becomes a big point of resistance for some pet dog owners, because they imagine that dog is better with them, who loves them, but doesn't fulfill them in any way, versus being totally fulfilled, getting to work, getting to, like, as we discussed, mate, like, hit that genetic prophecy, like, actually do what it was bred to do, but it's not gonna lay in anyone's bed at night, right? It's not gonna be
Mhm.
cuddled on the couch. And the truth is, the it's hard to kind of convince people that that dog would choose the work, right? Like, because yes, the relationship with them is important, but you can usually demonstrate this as trainers. We know, we see it, like how often I could leave with someone's dog, right? Now, like if you're in someone's home and they have an underfulfilled dog, the dog's not that happy, you start fulfilling it. You can, as a trainer, we can communicate with the dog, more appropriately than the people can. The dog immediately gets sticky to us. We're communicating what we like, what we don't. We're reinforcing the dog. We're at the dog's level. We're in the dog's head. You know as well as I do, mate, how often you could just walk out of that session with the dog and it will not even look back at those people. Like, it will not. Now, when it gets in the car, it might be upset for a few minutes, right? It might
Yep.
be a little bit stressed, but that's it. But when you get to where you're going and you continue doing what you were doing, that dog will never think of those people again. And that's what's
Mhm.
hard. Like, and when it sees those people, it'll be happy to see them, right? It'll always hold a special place in its heart for those people. But dogs don't live that way. Like, it's not going to sit in its kennel pining over missing those people. What it's going to do is sit in its kennel and be super excited about its next opportunity to go and work in the prison as a detection dog, because that's its whole new life, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that's one of the things that, if I can't convince people to change their lifestyle, now, of course, that's the primary, right? Like, that's what we want, right? When a dog is creating an issue for people, we want the dog to stay in the home. We want them to be able to change their lifestyle. But, uh, you know, that's not always possible. And I think that by giving people that ultimatum of like, this is what you have to do, very often, I think as trainers, people just kind of pay lip service to us and go, yeah, yeah, sure, I'll totally do that. And the minute you leave, they're like, I'm not doing any of that shit. And then this is how the dog secretly ends up in rescue. And they tell you everything's going great and they just dump the dog because it's all too much, right?
Mhm.
And or the dog gets placed somewhere that tells them the story that they want to hear. And I think that's our job as dog trainers, is to tell them the truth, but in a way that lets them truly understand that this is in the interest of the dog, right? Like, as a trainer, I'm not interested in upsetting your dog. Like, yes, I can potentially make some money out of taking the dog off of you. I can act as a middleman and take no cut, even if you think that's like my only, my only motivation. The truth is, this dog is going to be very much happier being biologically fulfilled, like getting to do, if it's a high drive dog and it's not fitting in with your home, your lifestyle, making sure that this dog is able to be fulfilled. Mother Nature stays happy, the dog stays happy, but you don't necessarily get to keep the dog, right? And I think that can be a hard thing to convince people of, but it's usually, every time that I've done it, it's been a great outcome.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. I mean, just like also too, it's like it's one thing with the lifestyle if you have kids and things like that, or if you like they o- like or living with like your very elderly mom or dad or something like that. There's always like a situation that varies, but then I also put it up to, like how badly or how invested they are with this dog. And
Yeah.
like emotionally, like the emotional fulfillment is like people just think every dog wants to be like sleeping on the bed, like like be hugged and kissed, and then that's it. And then they don't look at like the big picture when it comes to like the dog, the individual itself.
Yeah.
And
Dogs are individuals, man. And that's what I think, we as dog trainers don't necessarily do a good job of explaining that. And like, take for example, I'm at my house right now. I've got two dogs. One of them is at my feet. That's where she always is. No, you want to know where Valerie, my Springer Spaniel, is? She's at my feet. No
mhm,
matter where I am in the house, that's where she is. If I'm at this table, she's here. If I'm go to the bathroom, she's there. She's with me everywhere I go. My
mhm,
Malinois over the other side of the room, right? Like, he doesn't want to, and if I get up and leave, he won't move, right? That's like, he's asleep. That's where he stays. And so
mhm,
he's not a dog. Like, he lives in the house and he sleeps in his own bed, which is next to mine. But the idea of him getting in the bed with me, like, he has no interest in that. That is, it's not that he's not allowed, it's that he has no interest in being that. Whereas Valerie would live inside my face given the opportunity, right? Like, but they're two dogs raised in the same house. I've raised them both, but they're just totally different dogs. And that's what I think we've got to sort of understand as well. Is like each dog is an individual. Yes, breed gives us a ballpark, right? And then bloodline, even more importantly than breed, sort of tells us about like what were your parents like, right? Like what were your grandparents like? That's going to give us some pretty good clues as to what the actual dog itself is going to be like. But even then, the dog is an individual, and if we have the dog in front of us, we can say like, hey, this is what makes this dog happy, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and as we said right at the start, mate, it might not be linear, might not be so obvious what actually makes a dog happy. um and the behaviors that the dog displays and seems to be, you know, uh, certainly in the forefront of what the dog presents, even those might not be making the dog happy, right? Like those might be the symptom of a problem, right? And so getting to the core of that, really understanding who the dog is and fulfilling the dog, really like that's dog training, to be honest.
Yeah, and I always tell owners, like if you really want this dog to be happy, if you really want these issues or certain behaviors to like resolve or be at peace, you gotta be able to like provide these things for your dog. It's like when you have a kid, you have to provide all these different like outlets to stimulate, educate, but like,
Hmm.
and I've said, if the stress of having the dog overweighs the joy of having this dog, then that's where it's like consider rehoming. And it's like not even like bring your dog to a shelter or a rescue, but if you just like go help, go find like an individual or like,
Yeah, private rehome. Yeah.
yeah, private rehome, and just find a person with a lifestyle that fits the niche of the dog. And
Yeah.
like,
And of course, I should point out, because it'll get people upset. Like that's not what you're thinking as you go into every session, but it's
mhm,
in the Rolodex, right? It's
mhm,
in the it's one of the options that we have to keep up our sleeve. It's not the first thing I'm going to go to, but it is for sure something that I'm not taking that off the table. And I think that's like in the working dog world, that's just how we deal with things. Like the dog has to be suitable. If it's not
mhm,
suitable, it's unfair on the dog to try and force it to do something that it's not suitable or capable of doing. And that works in both ways. Like we tend to, in working dog space, we tend to move dogs on or rehome dogs that don't have what we need. um and and it becomes a like a real stigma in the pet dog world, is that it's like, oh no, this dog is too much, but you just have to put in the work. Now if you can put in the work, amazing, do it, like absolutely. But some people just can't, right? and
mhm,
and and it's not always fair to just blame the people, because their
of course.
circumstances could have changed. You don't know,
Mhm,
right? Like this could be, that they had one job, now they have another, or they have different kids, or you don't know how like their financial situation could have changed, now they have
yep,
to work more. You don't know how this stuff goes down. And just saying, well, you have to put in the work, like it's like okay, but like I've got bigger issues going on than this dog, right? That's
yep.
one of the things I think as dog trainers, we think that the dog is the number one priority in somebody's life, and in reality it sometimes just isn't.
Of course, yeah. I mean, like for families, there's always the kids' well-being, and then just like spouse and everything else. And yeah, it's just like situations happen or emergencies suddenly come up, and
Mhm.
so many different factors. And like and like yeah, with like working dogs and like like because it's so commonly practiced, and you just like dogs after another. Whereas like an owner, I feel like when they hear the word rehome, they make like a bad association where it's like, they're giving up on the dog, or like,
Yeah.
a sense of like you like failure. And I have to tell them like, no, this is not like, for this situation, it was just a mismatch more than like a failure, and
Mhm.
it's it's like, I tell people like, you having like this German Shepherd or Malinois that we got from that work like a working dog, right? It's
Mhm.
like this dog, like I'll just say things like, this dog's a little bit too spicy for your lifestyle, or like, like this dog would do a lot better in like a working role, or like a dog, or like a person that'll fulfill this. Whereas like with you guys, with kids, or like, you guys like to take it easier. You don't want to go for like 5K runs. You don't want to go like super, super like adventure, like you guys might do better with like a Labrador Retriever, or like like just like even like a rescue dog that's just a lot more low, like less active, and
Yeah.
it's just being able to just like I always try to comfort and like tell people like, hey, it's not the end of the world, because I've had to go through it where I had to rehome my, a dog or two, and
Mhm.
it's just like how people perceive it, just like how we have to understand how the dogs perceive certain triggers and stimulus. It's just, like I feel like as dog trainers we have to be like Dr. Phil and like
We are. That's for
yeah.
sure. For sure. There's a lot of, um, unfortunately, because we're not trained in it, you get some people who are really good at it just naturally, and some people who are terrible at it. And I think as dog trainers, it's definitely something that we should put more time into learning how to talk to people, how to engage with people better, how to understand people better, all those sorts of things, because they're our client in reality. The person is the client, not the dog. um, so yeah, I think that the more time you can put into that, the better, to really understand how to communicate that to people, how to talk to people really well.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%. We got she's
How's Pat's camera crystal clear? Dang, never seen a live video this clear. I got a fancy setup. I do a bit of this.
I know, I'm so jealous of the equipment. Even just like your post on Instagram with like when you work Remy and the other dog, I'm just like, oh, what would love to
I
have.
Matt, I've been trying to make a video on how to film yourself dog training. And I've got a lot of it filmed. I just haven't put it all together. And it's surprisingly easy. I went down the rabbit hole during COVID, and got kind of obsessed with video production, and to the point where last year, when I was kind of having a hiatus from dog training, I worked full time as the creative director of a sales and marketing agency, just making ads. And so I learned it's not money. The video I'm going to explain when I eventually bring it out is going to show that unless you're prepared to spend $12,000 on a camera, your iPhone is plenty. Like mid-range cameras are dead. It's now like your iPhone or your latest, Samsung Galaxy, whatever. If you've got a modern phone, you have everything that you need, and you won't
Mhm.
see an increase, a benefit, until you start spending really huge amounts of money. And I was about to put that video out, and finish putting it together as Sony released a brand new camera that makes a lie out of all that. And so now I can't finish it because like I have to redo some of it, because there is a new camera that is sort of at a much more affordable price point that is as good as the like $12,000 version. It's got like a proper animal tracking function, full frame sensor, blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff. So anyway, that's my story.
Damn, that's great. I was so excited for that post too when you said you were gonna have a course like that. I was like, I'm totally buying this course from Pat.
Yeah, oh, it won't
I
be course. There's gonna be a YouTube video. Like it's real easy. I don't know who cares whether people are that into it, but like filming dog training and stuff, it's all about compression. So
mhm,
getting like using your longest lens from as far away as you can.
mm,
And knowing how resolutions work. That's one of the main things, right? So knowing how resolutions work, and filming in a way that allows you to upload at a suitable resolution. But anyway,
mhm.
that's a different topic.
That's a whole different rabbit hole to go
Yeah.
into. But I think just our whole talk is when, my God, I know you dogs need to calm down. I know it's dinner time. You just give me a few more minutes. Like they're all like right here, just waiting. Like
Yeah, right. It's time.
they're all just waiting at this point. I'm just like, they are so not happy with the closed door twos. But anyway, um, but yeah, thank you guys for all the questions that watched and commented on this. This has been great. And Pat, especially, it's been amazing just talking with you, just going in depth about this. I was a little bit nervous at first because it's like you're a very like seasoned when it comes to like the whole like talking about Napo Po and things like that. Whereas I only finished Napo Po like last year. But this was such a fun talk, and I really appreciate Pat for just making the time to just
It's a
go in
pleasure, mate.
depth.
Thanks for
Because
having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. And guys, I still have Hannah talk about burnout in a week or two, and I have actually Heather that just asked the question. We're going to talk about aggression in dogs, which would be fun. She's also another
Cool.
gold graduate
Cool.
for this. So, but yeah, guys, Pat and I are going to sign out, and but thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. So, peace out, guys.
See ya.